everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Brewtally Speaking Podcast, the official podcast for MetalNexus.net. MetalNexus.net, where you can get all your news, interviews, and going-ons within the rock and metal world. I am John, and with me as always is Dan. How are you doing tonight?
Well, man, I'm doing good. The snow's melted. I can drive places. Things are really looking up on the Dan camp.
We're getting the exact opposite of that over here, which is how I was able to make a lot of money the last 2 days. But all of that aside, we have a really great guest for you guys on this one, and gals. We have Lindsay Schoolcraft, vocalist and live keyboardist for the band Cradle of Filth, kind of dipping into a little bit of, how would you classify Cradle of Filth at this point? I feel like they are the Venn diagram of all Venn diagrams for metal.
I would call them pop black metal.
Would you really?
Yeah, if you really want to get into it deep, I mean, I would say, well, they're a gothic metal band with slight depressive black metal influences and heavy keyboards, and I could throw like a whole bunch more, like with slight influences from death metal and melodic death metal, as well as gothic rock and slight industrial elements. But nobody wants to hear that, so let's just call it pop black metal, which is what it is.
Fair enough. It was kind of interesting how this came about. The band is obviously getting ready to hit the road on the, and I'm gonna probably butcher this again because it's such a mouthful with so many vowels and syllables and so forth. But the Cryptoriana World Tour, the Second Coming of Vice tour with Wednesday 13 and Raven Black. I still think, like I said in the interview, it's a shame they didn't put tour Tour in the album name just to make it a fun play on words.
Yeah, well, I mean, with Cradle of Filth, they've never had like a small vocabulary. So, throwing as many weird adjectives in there as you can is kind of par for the course.
Right. I think that was actually something that was kind of fun in listening back to the interview and editing it. The fact that in another interview, Lindsay had kind of said that initially she wasn't really a fan of some of Dani's high-pitched vocals that he had done, and then even had kind of made the comment in this interview about how, in researching the lyrics and getting ready for the tour and so forth, how there's a lot of words that Dani just makes up.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, how do you really quantify, records called like nymphetamine, pornography? It's weird, but totally fine, I guess.
Yeah, I think, something that was kind of fun too is like, I was listening to this record in preparation for the interview, and I had sent you a message, and I was like, I'd kind of fallen off the Cradle wagon a long time ago. Like, just the albums weren't really hitting me the way that some of the more classic records had, and that I was really pleasantly surprised that this record and the one before it were actually kind of a back to basics kind of approach for the band.
Yeah, I definitely appreciated a little bit more of the old sound, because once it becomes more keyboard than guitar, it starts to get to me. I've got the same complaints against other black metal bands like Dimmu Borgir and stuff. The ones that like are really well known, it kind of becomes more like gothic rock than it becomes like black metal. And I want to hear those shrieks and blast beats and stuff. I mean, that's why I'm here. I'm only here for Godzilla, So hearing them kind of go back more to that heavier sound, I think works really well with the band, but they've got a little bit more of a songwriting finesse. I mean, it really, like you talk about in the interview, it's like they've just got a new fire reignited underneath them. And I feel like they're going to go forward, and the albums that people didn't appreciate, are going to kind of be forgotten about, and people are going to remember Cradle of Filth as a classic band.
Yeah, kind of speaking of classics, let's switch over to part of our namesake. Tonight, I am drinking a local, I think it's technically a Sizer, but it's called Zombie Killer. And it is a hard cider with honey and cherry added. We found this, my wife and I found this at the Food and Wine Festival that Grand Rapids has every year, probably about 9 years ago.
Okay.
Like that. And again, I'm not much for ciders or meads or any of that kind of stuff personally. Like, when I find one I like, it's usually very far and few between. But there's just something about this. It's got a really nice flavor to it. It's not overly sweet. It's not overly kind of dry as some ciders can be. It's just got a really nice balance between the two while having a very unique flavor all unto itself. Like I said, I've not really found a cider that really tastes like this, or even a mead or a Sizer or whatever. And B Nectar, who makes it, they are based out of up near, I think, the Detroit area-ish. I like them a lot. Yeah. Like, they have really good, crazy stuff. Usually looking at anywhere from about $8 to $13 for a bottle of whatever they have. The Dude's Rug is pretty good. And a few other things. So if you ever see some bee nectar stuff, don't be shy. Go try some. Start with the Zombie Killer, work your way to whatever else sounds good. But that's what I'm drinking tonight. Dan, what do you got?
Well, I'm not drinking it tonight, but the last beer that I had, I was recording an episode of Discography Discussion last night, and I had a Four Hands Brewing Company beer called Absence of Light.
Absinthe or absinthe?
Absence.
Okay.
Like I'm absent for work.
Right.
I wish, right? But Absence of Light is like a weird peanut butter chocolate stout, and it's heavy. Like you can only one of them, and you're like full. Like you feel like you just had like a sampler of dessert menu items. But it's like a weird mix of like chocolate malt, caramel, and like peanut butter, which is again sounds disgusting on paper, but like it actually is very smooth. It's really good. I'll have to send you one of them because they're fantastic, and just definitely a good recovery, because the beer I had before that was also by Four Hands, and that was the chocolate milk stout, which I found to be absolutely disgusting. It seemed really good because they're like, dude, it's like drinking a dark chocolate milkshake, and I was like, yeah, maybe. And then I drank it and I was like, it just tastes like somebody poured like 4 cans of Bud Light into a chocolate milkshake, and it wasn't good. But they definitely came back with Absence of Light. I was like, okay, so the milk stout was just the idea, and then this is like the perfected idea.
It's funny. I'm a big fan of stouts and milk stouts and so forth. This past Friday, I actually had I want to say it was a Michigan local though, but it was a Neapolitan milk stout nitro. And so I was expecting it to be pretty good. Neapolitan stouts are kind of hit or miss, sadly. The idea of them is always good on paper, but a lot of times execution can either be just falls short of expectations, which is, I guess, on me. But yeah, it just wasn't good. I drank it, but it wasn't really anything to write home about. But kind of speaking to the variety of the beers that we have had, I think that's just as good of a segue to our guest, Lindsay Schoolcraft. So let's get to our interview with Lindsay of Cradle of Filth, and we will talk to you guys afterwards. So I have the pleasure this early afternoon, actually, of talking with Lindsay Schoolcraft, vocalist and live keyboardist for Cradle of Filth, who are getting ready to hit the road on the Cryptoriana World Tour, the second coming of Vice. That is a long mouthful of a tour name. How are you doing this early afternoon?
I'm pretty good, thanks. How are you?
Doing good. First of all, I got to say, admittedly, I've kind of fallen off of the Cradle of Filth wagon for a handful of years, but I gotta say, the last 2 records the band collectively has put out have been really, really good, and kind of got me really excited to go see you guys on this upcoming tour.
Thank you. That means a lot.
I kind of wanted to start off, though, your first album that you came in on, Hammer of Witches, with some of the members leaving, especially someone like Paul, who had been in the band for such a long time, did it put a lot of expectations on you and the rest of the band? Because I know in some of the other interviews I've heard with you, this was one of the first real big opportunities you've gotten to be a part of a full-time touring band on this level.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was interesting. It was Paul's time to go. We were sad to see him go, but he just wanted to move on and do other things in life, and we had to understand and respect that. And at that point, before he had left, back in 2000, I believe it's 2014, me and the bassist Dani Filth actually had started working on some compositions. And I know that Martin, our drummer, being the machine that he is, he's always writing. He's always got ideas. It's insane. So he had some stuff put together as well. And we were hoping that Paul Allender would take us on as songwriters and want to work with us, but then he had left, and Paul is such a big part of the legacy of this band. So we were like, oh crap, like what do we do? So then Richard and Ashok filled in for that tour at the beginning of 2014. They were the two fill-in guitarists because James had to make an exit too. And he had been with us for a long time as well. So, we did the one tour with them, and then after the tour, like, we didn't want to say goodbye to them. We grew like that. There's something with the lineup, there's such a chemistry, such a brotherhood. I mean, I'm the little sister, but, we just have this family vibe, and we didn't want to let go of them. And then they went from, like, being fill-in to, like, becoming full-time members and writing within months. It was a huge adjustment for them, but they took it pretty gracefully. And, yeah, we were really nervous. Like, I remember the day before the album dropped, we were just texting each other all day. We were so nervous. We're like, oh my God, what are people going to think? But it really put the pressure on us. But what I like about this band is, our drummer Martin, he's kind of the guy he's like our hub. He takes all our ideas, he arranges. He has his BA in music. So, I mean, he graduated from the University of Prague with his master's in music. So he's like a quality control for us, and he expects a certain level of musicianship and composition from us. And I think that's what's keeping us together. Like, he's the glue that holds together the band. So he pushes like us to be better writers and better musicians. And I think that's why this has been working.
No, it definitely, and the thing I kind of, I don't know if you guys read the comments at all, but it is kind of refreshing to see.
Try not to,
I know. It has been kind of refreshing to see so many longtime Cradle fans really taking to these last two records and kind of being like, this is the band I remember. This is the band I fell in love with. It's great to hear, Dani's vocals kind of echoing back to some of the earlier records and so forth. And it's kind of got to feel really good because, some people might look at you as hired guns maybe, but it's still got to feel really good that it's like, maybe for longtime fans that kind of were like, this period I wasn't really into it, but now I'm back and I'm really excited and reinvigorated in the band, that it's got to feel good for you knowing that you had a hand in bringing it back to that level.
Well, and that's the thing with this lineup, like when we all decided, okay, we're going to start writing albums together, we all we talk about it and we're like, all of us minus Dani himself, of course, we're all fans of the band. So what we do is we just kind of take influence from the history of the band, what albums we like the most that spoke to us, and kind of reinvent it and bring it back to today. And that's what we've been doing, and we discuss it. And I think, for this next album, we're more so looking at the atmosphere and the production of the album because, a lot of what that atmospheric vibe that was in Cruelty and Dusk and Midian is something that we kind of want to bring back and we're pushing for. And I hope that it's communicated and comes to fruition because it's just nice to see the old school fans liking us again. Like, we really just wanted to bring back what Cradle of Filth was for us, to do it our own way. And I mean, and all of us, is weird for us because we were hired guns, and every day it's like, oh my gosh, pinch me, like I'm in Cradle of Filth. Like, never would have thought that, knowing about them in high school and how big they were when I was in high school, right?
Right. Something else too, I mean, you've kind of spoken to it just now. I mean, this record is not even a year old, and you're already talking about how you collectively are starting to write for what will be the follow-up.
Yeah, we are kind of machines like that, but it's because we really love writing. Everyone brings something very different to the table. It's great that Martin has such an education with choirs and orchestra. And whenever a demo is submitted in our shared file sharing, I know who it's from. Like, everyone has their own unique style that they bring to the table, and then we just kind of mash it all together and make it flow. And I really like that. That's what I like about this lineup. Like, there's a different character and personality to everything that's contributed.
No, most assuredly. And, I kind of wanted to speak to this new record itself. The title, I mean, Cradle has been no strangers to coming up with some really interesting titles that kind of evoke strong visuals.
Yeah.
So with this one, I tried Googling the word.
Cyrptoriana.
Thank you. Which I feel like it was a miss that when you announced the tour that you didn't put TOUR into it and call it
Cryptoriana. I know, you would think Dani would be on top of that.
But with this record, and the offset of the name too, the Seductiveness of Decay, it kind of, from what I've gathered, kind of speaks to a fascination with death Is that kind of
Yeah.
on the right verge?
Yeah, it's a very like stereotypical goth thing. I think, you know, Dani's just reinventing a way of saying, you know, like the love of death, being in love with the idea of death, but then he puts this like lust twist on it, which he does a lot in his lyrics. He's very interesting to work with. Every time we write an album or I have to learn a song from our back catalog, I learn a lot of new words, and then I find out 50% of them he literally just made up.
I wondered that, actually. There's and something that was kind of cool about this record is you guys released you know, everything on YouTube, and a lot of the videos accompany with lyrics at the bottom of the screen. And, you know, I think that's something that kind of is missing from a lot of this style of music, you know, where a lot of people are like, I can't understand the vocals. And especially if you don't have the lyrics in front of you. So to me, it was something I've always kind of known about Dani, is just kind of his very poetic, you know, tortured soul of sorts, being almost an ever, you know, an omnipresent romantic, it seems. And
he is, and I actually talked about this with my friend last night, because I'm currently studying Cruelty and the Beast, because we'll be doing that live later this year. And I'm reading through the lyrics, looking for my speeches. And I'm like, man, it's crazy how he has such an interesting style of voice. Yet he's covering up all these beautiful lyrics. Like, no one knows that he's actually quite the incredible poet, because he's got this screechy, high-pitched guttural. Do you know what I mean? And
right.
It doesn't take away from that, but if you can't understand it, you can't understand it.
So when you're saying you're doing Cruelty and the Beast, are you guys performing the full record?
We will be doing the full album later this year at selected dates in Europe. Yeah, it's quite the beast of an album, like, no pun intended. I'm going through it right now, and I'm just like racking my brain trying to get around these speeches, because I mean, having the female voice in the band almost also as the keyboardist is something that really didn't develop until the last, I'd say less than a decade. I want to say something like around 8-10 years. Right. So when they were writing these albums, they weren't necessarily thinking about the future of having like a member who would sing the female parts, say the speeches, and then also play the crazy keyboard on top of that. So I am just having a hell of a time right now doing two people's jobs.
Yeah, you know, something that's kind of been interesting, and, you know, we've talked to a lot of different artists about doing these anniversary tours of sorts. When you guys are looking at doing this, are you going to present it exactly as it is on the record from start to finish, or are you going to play around like I've seen some bands like Unearth do, where you make a set list out of the record itself? So yes, you're playing it in its entirety, but not in the order that it comes in, which I think gives it a completely new life to the record.
That's really interesting. I may suggest that to the guys, but I think, because I went to see Mayhem, and they did, and I can't, because my brain is mashed potatoes right now from learning the Cruelty songs. They did one of their most famous albums front to back, and it has I think Meritos in the title. Anyways, they did. I know, I'm such a black metal fan, aren't I? The cult diehards are going to be after me, so like the elitists are going to have me, you know, hung for this. But they did, Mayhem did that iconic album from front to back. People loved it, and then they ended their set with a few of their well-known songs from other albums, which was perfect. I think it was only like 2, and it was an incredible night and an incredible show. And I don't think there's any real issue with, you know, even though people know what song is coming next, like, they don't really care. They're just so excited to see you live and playing that album live. I mean, I can suggest to the guys, but I think for the, like, you know, it's going to be like a from beginning to end type of thing with some extra surprises at the end.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, the fun thing, like, I saw Korn do their self-titled record anniversary, and they did it from start to finish. And what was interesting is they even did the in-betweens, like the spoken stuff, like, you know, of them just fucking around in the studio, playing over the PA. And I was like, this is, like, you know, the fact that, like, fans were even kind of doing, like, that whole thing where before, I think it was Faggot, where they have all that spoken word, and like Jonathan and everyone's just fucking around, and they're like, song starting, like they do, like they have that playing over, and the crowd's doing it, and it's like, it's kind of weird how like these things become larger than just being bullshit on a record, like just filler space or whatever, that it becomes a thing that we as fans know and then expect, like when you go see this. And it was an extra level that I had not thought of to do when you go see a band perform a record in its entirety like that.
Totally. It's so iconic. And that comes from an era where you could do weird little fillers on an album and people would listen to it because of the compact disc. Right. Not like this shuffle and, playlist generation that we're in now. So those little weird sections, people are about it. I mean, it was way more of a thing back then. I still, with Sepultura's Roots, I still know all the weird noises on that album back to front because it was during that time, right?
Right. Something else I kind of wanted to talk about that I feel like is a lot of fun, maybe not, is, the visuals that have kind of changed with the band. Like, in the videos you've done for this record cycle, even in the single, there's a couple of different outfits that you all get to wear, and it's kind of become part of the marketing as well. Like, there's various band photos within these different iterations of visuals that accompany the band. How fun is it to kind of be, I don't want to say a character per se, but to be able to kind of have varying outfits that you get to kind of do for this, at least this record cycle, and what kind of goes into creating that visual aspect for the band as a whole?
We talk about this quite a bit. Like, some of the guys in the band just don't care for it because they're musician heads first, and I totally understand that. So that's where some of the rest of us pick up our pieces. But it's all based on the person's personality. Like, Daniel Firth likes his vest because he's more into like traditional metal. Richard Shaw really likes his jacket. It's kind of his thing. And it's just everyone bases it on what they want. And I feel like for the guys, for me and Dani, it's more like a fun dress up thing because we're your typical artistic goth kids. But the rest of them, they I think like one outfit every album cycle is more than they can handle for the rest of them, bless them. But I love it. I mean, ask anyone, me growing up, I loved Halloween. I loved theater. I played the background shark and fish in The Little Mermaid when I was in elementary school. Like, I put on full, yeah, you name it. I danced around to Under the Sea. Like, I was always about dressing up and performing. It's been a huge thing for me. And funny enough is I was that weird punk rock goth kid from the high school to college. And I almost, right before Cradle of Filth, I was just becoming boring and like dyed my hair brown and, God forbid, started wearing color. Because I was just like, I don't know what, that was a dark time. Let me tell you, those are the dark ages of my life when I was in university. And I was just, trying to see if it would work. But then Cradle of Filth hired me and I went straight back into like, I literally am glad I didn't get rid of my wardrobe from college and high school because I needed it for stage. And, I love it. I mean, it's really nice, and it's been a form of artistic expression for me for a long time. And Dani too. And he's one of like Gothic culture's icons, and he's got a way about him, and I appreciate him for that. He's very inspiring when he wants to be. Bless him. He's like a close friend and my boss. So like, we're in close corridors a lot, and we get on each other's nerves, but at the end of the day, like, he's still an inspiration for me and a good friend and a great, and artistic influence. And I love it. I love when he comes to me asking for makeup ideas, costume ideas, color schemes, stage planning. Like, there's so much that goes into this band. I've told people, like, it's about 60% music and 40% image. And I mean, I'm kind of like, some days I just want it to be 100% music, and I understand where the rest of the band is coming from. But when you've got such dramatic music, you have to have the visuals matching it. Absolutely.
Something that kind of stuck out about the video itself is, Dani's microphone stand and your, I don't want to call it crown, but like the adornment that you're wearing on your head, both are featured horns or antlers prominently.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out if there's something going on with that when listening to the song itself and kind of looking at the record as a whole. And I didn't necessarily find anything, but it's too on the nose to not mean something or to have there be something more there to me.
Right. So how do I explain this? When it comes to antlers, I've always kind of had I didn't know this, but with Hammer the Witches, like I was just like, okay, I'm just going to present myself as like a very organic, soft grunge kind of witch. And I wanted to wear antlers. I don't know where it came from, but it's just something I wanted to do. And then I found out later it had something to do with it's more of like a pagan goth trend. I didn't know this, and I'm not claiming I started it. So I've just kind of I've been wearing antlers for a while now, and it's just been kind of, it's just kind of something I like to do. And I don't know, we didn't actually plan that with Heartsick and Seance music video. We showed up and I brought my deer skull to wear on my head, and they were like, oh, look, we just decorated like your microphone stand and your keyboard stand with antlers. And I'm like, well, that worked out kind of cool. But I mean, bones are kind of a seductiveness of decay if you think about it. So right. I mean, it tied in pretty well.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely changing myself up. I'm gonna pull a Madonna and reinvent myself a little bit moving forward, because there's only so many ways you can wear antlers before, you know, either I wear something too heavy and break my neck, or it just, you know what I mean? I've tried I'm like looking at reinventing that, and I'm like, I think I'm just gonna put the antlers to rest. They've done their time. But no, I'm a huge fan of being from Canada, North American wildlife. You know, and I have First Nations in my family, and it's like an adopted spirituality for me. And the deer represents, especially the males with their antlers, it represents confidence, and it's something that I like to remind myself I need a lot of, because I'm very much one of those fake it till you make it, kind of second guess myself and need my community, you know, should I wear antlers, guys? Yeah, cool, okay. So it ties up. It ties up in the imagery, and it has some meaning behind it for sure.
You know, kind of in slowly starting to wrap up, a lot of people were very surprised to see Dani Filth pop up on the latest Bring Me to the Horizon record, and especially with the video, which was very kind of tongue-in-cheek as well.
Yeah.
You know, obviously I would assume he kind of talked about, you know, hey, I'm going to be on this, or I got this opportunity to go do this thing with, you know, arguably one of the bigger bands currently in the, I'll say, metal scene, and a lot of people will probably get mad at me because they want, obviously, not metal anymore, but regardless.
Right.
You know, what was kind of your reaction to that? Because I know Dani's obviously done a lot of guest vocal spots, but not something I think so quote-unquote mainstream.
Right, okay, so he actually didn't tell us about it, which
we
were all kind of like, oh, okay, until like there was like an inkling of it on social media, because his daughter is a fan of Bring Me Horizon.
Okay.
But this is 6 years ago, he was asked to be on Motionless in White. Like Chris Motionless contacted him and said, hey, you should come do a song. And he was just humming and hawing and like, no. And I'm like, I only knew him for like a few weeks at this point. And I said, yes, like, go do it. Collaborate. I love collaborating. Everybody know I love singing. I've sang on many, many projects. I mean, I'm even in the comic book Beelzebubs right now as the character Schoolcraft, and I'm going to be in the music video coming out soon. You know, like I'm all about collaborating. I think it's like, it can just lead you to the coolest places. So, you know, with that, and then him seeing how the reaction was when people found out, hey, Dani's on a Motionless in White song, I think that gave him the confidence to move forward and do that, because he's such a unique voice. There's no one in the world like him.
No.
And I think if people want to work with him, they should, because like you're never getting, like, no one else is like him. And that's the thing. He'll have bad days on stage. We all do. I have. Every one of us in the band has, and everyone I know who's a musician who does what we do has. And he'll come off stage and be like, oh, it's okay. And I'm like, dude, even if you think you were terrible, you're the only person in the world doing your thing. So it was fine. And he's like, oh, okay. You know, he's great. He's very hard on himself. And I think that he's getting more of that, you know, those deer antlers, man, representing the confidence. He's getting
comes back.
Yeah, it does. He's getting that confidence. So, yeah, when we found out, we were like, dude, that's amazing. But, you know, he just gets tied up in his own head and just kind of forgets to tell us things. And it is what it is. But, yeah, when we found out, we were really happy for him. And it's just amazing to see that people reacted to it so well, and the music video was adorable. Like, I loved it. So yeah, I mean, I'm proud of him for reaching out and collaborating, because he's a bigger name than me, and he is the face of Cradle of Filth. It's his band. So having him do that, I think it's a mutually beneficial thing for him and whoever he's working with. Definitely.
Last two questions for you, and I don't know if the last one is officially a question, but I'll get to there. So Rob Zombie has obviously is known for his theatrics, his stage outfits, and all these kind of things. And one of the more interesting time periods of his career as a solo artist to me was when he stripped it all away, literally. Like, no big stage production, no costumes, no nothing. Just, here we are, we're a rock and roll band, and we're going to kick your ass for like an hour and a half. And to me, it was really interesting, because at that point, it really strips away everything and makes it about the music, which makes that stand out even more and shows you how good of a songwriter him and his band are. Has there ever been talks of doing something like that within Cradle, even recently? Like, where you just kind of drop all the aesthetics and just kind of do a straight-on show with it just being the focus on music?
Oh, I think we'll always dress up going on stage because our fans expect that. But I think for the last few years, if anything, because we haven't been doing the live stage show, we've actually been really trying to prove ourselves as musicians. I think, if anything, Cradle of Filth Live has been more about the musicianship than anything, because we haven't really been doing like the giant, like on occasion if it happens, but like the fire and the smoke. And we're actually bringing back the theatrics for this tour in North America. Like, there's been talks of some really crazy dramatic stuff happening on stage. I'm so excited for it. We have a big rehearsal coming up right before the tour. And we're going to leak some of that on social media for our fans to show them, like, we're bringing back what we did back in the day. But yeah, I mean, if anything, that's what we have been doing. But I think that has been so important for this lineup, because, looking at the history of Cradle of Filth, we're fresh. I mean, it's amazing. Our anniversary was last week. We've been this lineup for 5 years. We did 2 albums together. We're doing a 3rd album together. Having that stripped down stage show has really given us our chemistry and shown us our way, and has allowed us to grow and turn us into the performers we are. So now it's like we've earned the right to have that theatrical big show back. So, it's kind of been like that. We've kind of been like club gigging for the most part, I'd say, the last 6 years, really.
Yeah. And then, lastly, so I was looking up a couple interviews with you to kind of get an idea of how you are when you're being interviewed and so forth. And one of the ones I found, it talked about how a record that kind of got you into, I would say, heavier music or whatever, was Kitty's Spit.
Hell yeah.
I've had Fallon on here a handful of times already, basically just going over Deftones' discography. But it kind of dawned on me, since, she's done interesting stuff, within like Pigface and stuff like that with Martin Atkinson, that, you both, and I know Canada's a very large area, but it was kind of one of those things that, with you both working solo and working on music and so forth, I kind of was like thinking to myself, would you be interested in doing like a collaboration with Fallon and doing something, given her diverse nature of musical influences between, going through what Kitty did to even what she's done on her own and in Amphibious Assault and so forth. And I think, the more I thought about it, I was like, I think you guys, the two of you, could actually come up with some really interesting, diverse music.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been an honor to work with her. I've spoken with her online. I've never formally met her. Like, we've been in the same room a few times, but we've never actually had the chance to like meet. She's an incredibly talented musician, and yeah, of course, 1000%. I'm friends with Mercedes and Tara, and me and Morgan Lander are homies, and she's actually I did a song for Rocky Gray, the ex drummer of Evanescence. He did a horror film, and me and him and Morgan did a song together on his soundtrack. So I've kind of already hit the Kitty camp, but when it comes to Fallon, like, I would love to just pick that woman's brain and come up with a song with her. Like, she's just incredible.
Yeah, most assuredly. And I figured it's just something in the Canadian waters that has to happen eventually.
Yeah, it's going to happen. Like me and Elisa Whitegloves eventually will collaborate together, and me and Fallon, and there'll be more. Me and my friend Leah from Vancouver. There's so many of us. We gotta get the collabs going when there's time.
Right. Well, that was all I had for you. Where can everyone find you and or the band online?
Yes, you can get us on Instagram at Cradle of Filth. You can get me on Instagram. It's at Lynn's Riot. Just search for Lindsay Schoolcraft. I'm the first person who comes up. I'm also on Twitter under the same handle. And yeah, you can find us on all social media. We're there, and I'm fairly active. And I know Dani Filth has been very active on his Instagram, so check him there. You never know, you might get a response. Maybe.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to this, the Cryptoriana World Tour, the second coming of Vice, starting March 3rd in Vegas and ending April 4th in Dallas, with a date here March 24th in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Very much looking forward to it with Wednesday 13 and Raven Black. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, you as well. Thanks so much.
So that was my conversation with Lindsay Schoolcraft of Cradle of Filth. Dan, what did you think of that interview?
Well, I'm glad that you could now talk to people in Canada. That's a big one. I thought it was a good interview, and it was fun kind of to hear not exactly an acknowledgement that Cradle of Filth had kind of started to fall off the bandwagon, but a little bit of an acknowledgement of that when they're like, look, we've got new fire under the band. We're going back to a sound that's more comfortable for us. And, you know, we're starting to kind of create the feeling of this is the Cradle of Filth that people signed up for.
Right.
And I thought that was kind of a cool exploration.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun though. And something, you know, I don't think I've said enough on this actually. And I kind of wanted to say this when I was making the post that, you know, thanking her for coming on the show and how much I enjoyed the conversation. But I realized it kind of sounds almost like a put down, but basically, you know, I love when we have women on the podcast. I wish we could get more of them on the podcast because they offer a completely different perspective on a lot of things. I mean, it's a very male-dominated genre of music and music in general, I would say. And to have Lindsay's point of view on, you know, a band with the legacy of Cradle of Filth, there was actually one question I didn't get to, which I had been kind of wondering, and I guess I'll pose it to you, or maybe I have already in the past, but, you know, Cradle of Filth for a lot of people, I think, has just become known as the band that has the Jesus is a cunt shirt.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, does the band's name really live solely based on a fucking t-shirt at this point, or does the music actually still carry the band as far as they've gotten?
Not at this point. I don't associate the band with that sort of shirt mindset that they were kind of introduced to people with. I think that was kind of their big publicity push in the early years, you know, and that was just a black metal thing. Like, let's be as controversial as humanly possible. And I don't think that they're necessarily held to that now. But yeah, it is funny because for the longest time, the only thing you could ever hear about Cradle of Filth is, oh, are they the band that has that shirt? You know, and everybody wanted that shirt for the longest time. It was like a hot seller. And, you know, I didn't get one because, you know, I don't think the Christian bands that I was playing in at the time would have appreciated that. I always did think it was funny. It would have been funny to buy that shirt and wear it to like Cornerstone or something.
Right.
But then, you know, there's a certain feeling of like, oh, okay, so you're that guy. But to answer your question more specifically, no, I don't think the band is really held to that image much. I think of Cradle of Filth now more of a band that tells horror stories and kind of like more like spacey, gothic, just extra otherworldly type of stuff. And I enjoy that about them more so than the earlier controversial, like, let's make a huge statement and then see what everybody thinks about it. You know, I don't think they're that band anymore.
No, and listening to the newest record, it definitely sounds like, and this is going to be kind of a weird comparison. I don't really know that these two bands have ever been compared, but I think from a lyrical aspect is where it kind of makes sense to me. But I feel like it's like for metal dudes who don't want to like a band like him, this is a way to kind of get your like pseudo romance on in your lyrics, your kind of weird semi-romantic lyrics with like dark tinges of gothicness to them and so forth, but you know, with blast beats and all that stuff, as opposed to having someone like sing at you.
I have never heard that comparison before. That is, I wouldn't say it's on par with the Joe comparison, but because it makes logical sense. But that is an interesting way of looking at it.
Well, I
that
mean,
guys like me that might start feeling a little insecure listening to something like him for too long. Something like Cradle of Filth is kind of a perfect way to get the same vibe without compromising your super metal ideals or whatever.
right. Yeah, and kind of going back to what you were saying about, the band kind of being controversial in the beginning, something we touched on that was controversial to a lot of people, but not so much steered toward Dani or anybody in the Cradle of Filth camp, but Dani's appearance on the new Bring Me record. And a lot of people
Yeah, that was unexpected.
Yeah, and it was, especially in the video for it, Dani kind of has a very tongue-in-cheek kind of aspect to it, where it's like, yeah, I'm just gonna wear my normal Cradle of Filth gear and I'm gonna go grocery shopping. Like, it's amusing about how absurd it is, like visually and so forth.
Wait, you mean that's not how Dani Filth goes grocery shopping? I just thought that was like a par for the course, day in the life of kind of thing.
He might actually do that, but it was, I had kind of figured it would have been a thing where he would have leapt at the opportunity, really, I guess, to do that, knowing that he had already done the Motionless in White song prior. So the fact that Lindsay was like, actually, we kind of had to persuade him into doing that Motionless in White song, and the fact that he didn't even tell them that, like, yo, I'm doing this Bring Me song. And I think it's kind of interesting because it's like, in as much that Bring Me has gotten so much shit for changing their sound so, quote unquote, so drastically over the years, I think it's funny that no one really was like, oh, fuck Dani Filth for going into this band.
Well, I think anybody that felt that way about Dani Filth felt that way like 10 years ago. I mean, honestly, like when we were talking earlier, I can't help but laugh a little bit when we're talking about, like, I want to still be super metal and cool, but listen to Cradle of Filth or whatever. Dude, there was nothing metal or cool about listening to Cradle of Filth like 7 or 8 years ago.
Right.
Like they were considered like the ultimate sellout band, like in that genre. People that are into black metal don't listen to Cradle of Filth, dude. Like they just don't. And that's fine. That's fine for the rest of us because like we don't really want like just straight black metal all the time,
Right.
So they built on something and made it listenable, whereas people that are into that kind of underground music or scene, they don't want listenable, So anybody that was going to hate on Dani Filth has already gotten that out of their system.
Right. I guess that's true. I just thought it was interesting that, she basically had mentioned, like, none of them knew that was happening until more or less it was like, here's a song. And it's like, oh, shit.
There's actually a Metal Hammer article that's a few years old, probably go back all the way to like 2005, 2006.
Okay.
And it's like the 101 rules of black metal. And like number 1 is don't be Dani Filth.
Something, going back that far, actually, that's a great segue to something that also caught me off guard and I thought was really cool and sadly, it's only going to be for a handful of European shows, and I haven't seen this anywhere so far. But apparently, Lindsay said that the band's going to be doing the Cruelty and the Beast in its entirety. You can't necessarily call it an anniversary show because the 10-year anniversary or whatever was last year.
Yeah.
So it's like
it's not a 10-year thing.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know many bands that celebrate 11 years of something, but I mean, it'll be interesting because here in America, we've been kind of over inundated with the whole anniversary album package tour, whatever.
20 years. It was 20 years, wasn't it?
Yeah, maybe it was.
Cruelty and the Beast was like 90s.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I think it came out in 98.
I just was thinking that because that's one of the very first albums I ever heard by them.
Okay. There's so many records that I sometimes forget what came out where because their just output was so quick. Yeah, it's kind of weird because, like, I remember we had someone on the show, and I can't remember who it was off the top of my head, but, someone had made the comment that, even though there are records and songs that are of a certain age, 10, 15, 20 years, however long, it may be for that band, that basically they said it was the newer stuff that people were attaching to and wanting to hear more, to where they're like, oh, fuck, I guess it's kind of cool to hear those songs and some of the ones we don't ever hear, but I actually really wanted to hear the new stuff. And I think for me, if I'm kind of being honest, like, Cradle's got so much material, I actually think I'd like to hear a lot of the newer stuff because I think that's more indicative of how they sound now, and I think they're more excited about that.
Let me preface this by saying I'm typically wrong about these kind of things, but I'm going to take my best stab at it. I think anybody whose favorite album is Cruelty and the Beast by Cradle of Filth probably hasn't been on board with Cradle of Filth for the past 20 years.
Fair enough.
I mean, maybe we'll give it 15 years or 10 years or whatever, but like I feel like they had changed so significantly from that record to now. I don't know how I mean, I think the old fans might come out to see it, but considering this style and the way the fan base works, I think Cradle of Filth was a really good gateway band for people into black metal that eventually went on to find like deeper and darker and more offensive stuff. I don't necessarily think that the old fans are necessarily going to be on board, but I think some of them might come out. Again, I'm typically wrong about these things, so.
Are you excited about now a third record where they're just really firing on all cylinders and they're just seemingly in this really inspired space? Does that have you excited for Cradle of Filth going for the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be cool for fans. I'm not the biggest Cradle of Filth fan in the world, so I'm not always the right person to ask. I mean, I'd rather hear a new record by them than see like blood in my urine. But I definitely do think that it'll excite fans of the band that have been fans of the last two records, but I don't know how many of those old fans they're going to pull in with it.
Do you think that actually works in their favor? Actually, here's a better question. As someone who's gone through a band's discography as much as you do for discography discussion, do you think a band of Cradle of Filth's level of, the legacy they have of being around for as long as they have, the records they put out, do you feel that it, having lineup changes actually is a good thing?
Definitely. Because one of the things that I notice is that bands that keep the same lineup for like 20 plus years, we're talking like classic bands. Slayer. You switch a drummer out here and there, but they get stale. They get so honed in on what they're doing, and they do change, but like they get so stagnant. I think one of the best examples I can think of is like something like A Bullet for My Valentine, when we were talking about how, I had felt as a fan that they had grown stagnant in their sound and was really happy whenever they started changing it up a bit. I think with a band like Cradle of Filth, you kind of have to have a new lineup to keep it exciting, to get new ideas on board, because I think in the Fear Factory discography discussion, which is funny because that band had so many lineup changes, but I remember saying that like their whole sound was based on a grab bag of ideas. Like each album might sound different than the last, but it all still comes back from that grab bag of ideas. Whereas you're expanding all of those ideas by bringing new people into the fold and actually listening to what they have to say about the songwriting.
I definitely agree with all that. I'm very much looking forward to seeing Cradle of Filth. I haven't ever seen them live, so I'm very much looking forward to seeing Lindsay and the guys and hopefully hearing a lot of the new material live and reporting back on how that went. And we're going to start wrapping this episode up. So if you'd like to keep up with all things Metal Nexus, you can find them at metalnexus.net, Facebook at Metal Nexus, Instagram at metal.nexus, and Twitter at metal_nexus. If you would like to keep up with Cradle of Filth, you can find them, are you ready for this? At Cradle of Filth, everywhere. They're one of those amazing online personas where you can find them at the same thing everywhere. And if you would like to keep up with Lindsay on Instagram and Twitter, again, very simple. On both, it's at Linz Riot. And speaking of her socials, actually, as soon as I was done with this interview, I went on Twitter, tweeted at Fallon that I had just done an interview with Lindsay and that she was interested in working with Fallon. Fallon said she was down. Lindsay wrote back that she was stoked and would hit her up soon. And so I guess, I put that out into the universe and maybe something's going to come of it.
And John can expect, 30% of the proceeds from, whatever that ends up being, right?
Well, they're both Canadians, so I think my return on investment's going to be a little bit less here in the States.
Oh, you're like a spitting distance from Canada. You're fine.
The exchange rate still applies.
Well, that's very true.
And speaking of the exchange rate, Dan, where can people find you online?
You can find me in America at Discuss Metal Dan on Twitter. Yeah, America.com. Discuss Metal Dan on Twitter. danandjoeshow@gmail.com for email. And you can find my other podcast, Discography Discussion, at discussmetal.com or on Spotify or on Google Play or on whatever you're listening to this podcast on, except SoundCloud. We're not on SoundCloud.
And if you would like to keep up with all things this podcast, you can find us on Facebook at Brewtally Speaking. Twitter and Instagram are BrewSpeakPod. And you can email us at brewtallyspeaking@gmail.com. You can find us on almost every platform as well. And Dan very quickly is going to tell you why rating, reviewing, and subscribing is important.
Oh, man. Rating, reviewing, and subscribing is like the best for podcasters because you're supporting us. You may not think you are, but you are. Anything that you say shows a listener, shows a subscriber. These algorithms that dictate what podcast you listen to or which ones are recommended to you, they go off of all of that. So you throw a starred rating on there, it's perfect. It lets people know that you're listening. It lets us know that you're subscribed, that you're into it. Lets us know that you're not into it, whatever it is. And so just keep those comments coming. And speaking of comments, we talk a lot about, our favorite beers and our favorite mixed drinks and stuff. We've got social media, dude. Post those pics of what you're drinking, stuff that you think that we should check out. If you have a beer like I fell in love with Space Dust, if you have a beer that's like that, let us know what it is. We'll check it out. We'll talk about it on the show. Just throw all that out on our Twitter, on our Facebook, on our Instagram. Let your voice be heard.
And speaking of various coffees, spirits, and so forth, if you would like to keep up with our show sponsor, The Bean Bastard, you can do such at thebeanbastard.com. Go over to Facebook and Instagram at The Bean Bastard. If you actually go to either our socials or The Bean Bastards, you will see that they are doing it's not a GoFundMe, it's more of a loan, actually. It's a new website I've never heard of, where basically they are looking for, I think, $6,000 to get their Bean Mobile or the Bastard Mobile or whatever they call it up and running so they can kind of start taking this show on the road literally and figuratively. And the nice thing is you get your money back.
It's a loan. It's not a handout.
It's a crowdfunded loan, which I think is really interesting. So you literally have nothing to lose. So go over there. I think it's at Kiwi. Kivi. But again, just go to the Bean Bastards Facebook page. I'm sure you'll see it there. If you feel so obligated to donate, every little bit helps. I donated $25. So every little bit, whatever you can donate will help. And like I said, you'll get your money back. So nothing to lose. And with that, we're going to end this episode. So for the Brewtally Speaking Podcast, I am John.
And I'm Dan.
We will talk to you guys next time.